Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Hayley Jones. Today's case takes us to Wales. So let's go. Sin and Tonic! How are we all doing this fine Friday? I am doing a lot better, thank you. And thank you so much for all of the love in the comments. And yeah, I'm on the mend, so all is fabulous. Hopefully this week I can actually breathe properly through the video and not feel like I'm going to fall asleep at the end, which I did. I went to bed and it was glorious. Like I said, today's story takes place in South Wales, in a place called Phillipstown, which was very, very small, is very, very small. At the time of our story, Hayley Jones is 26 years old. Hayley was very popular. She was kind, she was very caring, and she actually went into the caring profession. Previously to our story, when Hayley was 13 years old, which is very young, she met somebody called Brian Lewis. Now, at the time, he was 18 years old, so he was quite a bit older than her, and they started up a relationship which was not best pleasing Hayley's parents. They weren't happy with it, and from what I could gather, they didn't go too hard. They didn't push her too hard on the subject because they didn't want to push her away. It became apparent that they were going to stay together, and after 2 years of being in a relationship, Brian's mum kicked him out of their home. So Brian was now homeless, he had nowhere to live, and he didn't have a job. And Hayley's family, even though she was only 15 at the time, they took him in. So Brian ended up living with Hayley and her family, which sounds like it could be a bit tricky, but actually it showed Hayley's family that Brian was funny, he was kind to Hayley, and it showed them this side of Brian, you know, a nice side of Brian, and that they became even more okay with the relationship. I went to say something then and I was like, what was I going to say? It just slipped out of my mind. Boom, gone. Okay, I've remembered. The family would also go on to say that they were smitten with each other, very much in love. And this was after 2 years. So everything seemed kind of okay at this point in the story. About a year later, so Hayley was 16 years old and Hayley fell pregnant with their first child. 2 years after that, when Hayley was 18, the couple then moved out. So Hayley had a job in a care home. Like I said, she went into that profession. And Brian would just sort of like bounce about in between jobs. This meant that effectively they were quite a poor family because they were always really only living off of one wage, which was Hayleys. But money is not everything, is it? And it seemed like at this point in our story, the couple were quite happy. They didn't have a lot of money. They had the one child and Hayley was working, but they did go and see their friends every week at the pub, and people would say that they seemed genuinely happy and enjoying their life. As is often the case in these stories, all was not as it seemed. So although their friends and their family were, you know, everything's cushy, everything's sweet, oh, they're quite happy, things were not always that way, and Brian would often have mood swings and be a bit of a prat, and also they would argue. So sometimes these arguments would end up with Brian going to stay with his mum. It would come to light that Brian was very controlling over Hayley. By the way, this is where in the story I'm going to have to just control myself because it makes me really cross. This story does actually anger me quite a lot, but I'm going to try and rein it in, I think. For example, Hayley was the main breadwinner. She was the one going out to work. And I'm not saying that the main breadwinner should have all say and control. You know, people do this differently, guys. Everyone has their own ways of living together, being a couple, spending money, who earns more, who earns less, you know, whatever. There's all different ways, there's, you know, fine. But he was not working and she was working, but she would have to ask him for money. Now, okay, what? That annoys me. So, okay. He would also have a lot of say over her going out. So if she wanted to go out and see friends, it had to be run past him. She had to ask his permission, really, to do anything. So she had to ask him for her own money, and she had to ask him whether she could go out, and if she was going out and he allowed it. And this is just so many red flags, isn't it? Really, like, whoa, no. If he was going to allow her to go out and see her friends, he wanted to know who was going to be there, where they were going to go, and he would check up on her as well and make sure that everything was what she said it was going to be. Just really, yeah, red flag central. The controlling behaviour would get progressively worse, and to the point where Hayley had to leave her job. She had to quit her job, right? Because Brian had no control over Hayley when she was at her job, out of the house, and he could not stand it. So he didn't want her to not... He didn't want her to have a life that he had no control over. Like, he wanted control over every part of her life. And when she was out at work, he had no control over that. He didn't know what she was doing at lunchtime, where was she, you know, all of that sort of crud. So, yeah, it ended up with Hayley leaving her job. Not only did it progress to this point where Hayley had to leave her job, but also his behaviour, Brian's behaviour, changed massively, and people started to notice that as well. What happened? I don't know what happened. But he started to just be really, really unkind. He really tore Hayley down. He just worked away at her self-esteem. He would call her a slag. He would teach their children to call Hayley a slag as well. Hayley's family would say that he lost all patience with Hayley and their children, and he was just verbally and emotionally abusive. Just a horrible person to be around. What a horrible turn of events, going from this guy that was funny and nice and would have done anything for her to this situation. It's just horrible. I feel like I just want to know what happened there. What happened? Was this always kind of the underlying case, but he just couldn't hide it anymore? Had he always been really controlling? Was it when she got her job, when she was 18, and started to have a life away from him, that he just couldn't handle that? Maybe, I don't know, because before that she was a child, basically, and they lived together and spent all their time together, and he didn't work. Maybe it was like a tipping point when she started to have a life. Anyway, moving on, she then got a Facebook account. I mean, what the hell? So this guy that wants to control every single part of her life, and now she's got a password protected an account that's, you know, not his. This just spells out disaster, doesn't it? Brian wanted her cut off from people. That's why he wanted her to leave her job. He wanted full control over who she was seeing, who she was seeing, who she was talking to, all that business. And then all of a sudden, like Facebook, woo, in your face, it comes along. Like, that must have just been too much for him. And it was. He would smash her phone. And they were poor as well. Like, this must have just been horrible, like smashing her phone. He'd smash the laptop. So they had a computer, family computer, laptop thing, and he would smash it. And he would punch holes in their walls, and he smashed up their microwave. And as you can guess, this violence then turned towards Hayley. As I was researching this case, you could really see the progression of this change in Brian, and it's just, yeah, it's horrible. He would pull her hair, he would slap her around the face, and then it moved on even further, and he would do that in front of her friends and family, just escalating. Because she was so embarrassed of his behaviour and the way he treated her, she just became a recluse. She now had no job. She now didn't want to go out and socialise because he would effectively beat her up in front of her friends and family. Like, what the hell, man? So she just stayed at home and she didn't do much. And that is what he wanted. He wanted her at home. And although he didn't like her Facebook account, it was better than her going out, and he had no control at all. So he preferred her to be at home even if she was on Facebook. And she was on Facebook a lot because this was her only connection now to the outside world. So it was her, you know, what do I mean? Well, that was her socialisation. That was her life now, was being lived through Facebook. He would monitor her conversations, her messages, her feed. There was still an element of control for Brian, even though he didn't really like her being on Facebook. Just a piece of shit. As you can imagine, Hayley wasn't happy. She wasn't a happy person anymore. This isn't what she'd signed up for. This isn't the guy that she had met and fallen in love with. And also, 13 is a very young age. You change an awful lot, I think. I'm not saying that people that do start relationships when they're in their teens, it's not going to work. What I mean is, for some people, it's not going to work. And he changed dramatically, didn't he? And I think Hayley changed as well. Like, she grew up and she got a job, and yeah, he didn't like that, did he? Because he met her when he was an adult. I know 18's really young, but yeah, he didn't want things to change, and it did, and she outgrew him. What was my point? There we go, I remembered. Honestly, the brain today. What? So, I've just literally forgotten again. Oh my God, Sophie. Oh, my freaking God. It's literally falling out of my brain. What? She needed an action plan because she wanted to leave him. She wasn't happy. That's what my point was. She wasn't happy. This isn't what she signed up for. That's what I was saying. And she wanted to leave Brian. But, I mean, he's beating her now. It's escalated quite quickly. So she's bloody scared, as she would be. That's a scary thing with somebody. Like, I can't actually imagine. I've not been in that situation myself, thank God. But yeah, that must be really, really frightening and such a big scary thing to do when someone is like violent towards you. She needed support. She needed a plan. But the thing was, the only way that she could talk and communicate with people was on bloody Facebook, on Messenger. So she had to become like super covert. Ooh, ooh, ooh. She had to have these conversations. I guess she might have been deleting messages, because if he was checking up on her, you wouldn't want them to be found. I don't know. But she had to have these conversations with friends and family about leaving Brian without him seeing. And they were only ever at home together. And he's like all looking over her shoulder all the time. So she had to be nifty with that. Fucking hell, this thing, is my head too small? Try as she might to be secretive about the conversations that she was having with her friends and family about leaving him, he got very, very suspicious, because when he walked into a room, she'd shut the laptop, or if he sort of sat near her, she'd move the screen so he couldn't see it. So obviously, you know, she's hiding something. And Brian thought that she was cheating on him. So this made his behaviour even worse. Now we get to February 2009, and Hayley finally says to Brian, I want out. I don't want to be with you anymore. I want to end the relationship. And then I don't understand this at all. Maybe there was a reason and I couldn't find it, but they agreed that Brian would stay in the house, but he would sleep on the sofa. So they would not be together. They would separate. It seems like he took it quite well. And that he would sleep on the sofa for a month or two. And then he would move into his mum's house. Why not just move in straight away? I don't understand that myself. Why prolong if you're going to split up? I was his mum not living there? Was she on holiday? I don't know. But anyway, so the agreement was that they would not be together anymore. They were separated, but he would sleep on the sofa. There was a pivotal moment not long after this where Brian, Nobby, hacked into Hayley's Facebook account. So he must have gotten her password or guessed it, I don't know. But anyway, he then read all of these freaking messages. I don't think she had deleted them because he read them, or most of them. So he went bonkers. He spent a couple of days literally grilling Hayley about what she'd written, what she'd said, just being an arse, really. And I don't know. I mean, let it go, dude. Like, she wanted to leave you. It's there, clear as day. Anyway, so it wasn't a pleasant few days. And then it all came to a crescendo where one evening, and Brian was at the pub with his friends, and he went on to Hayleys Facebook Messenger again. So he's now at a pub. They're not together anymore. He's now gone out to a pub with his mates, and he's sitting at the pub looking at her Facebook. I mean, douche. So he then rings Hayley. He's drunk. He rings her up, and he's just furious. I don't know what he saw. Maybe there were new messages. Maybe she was being unkind about him, whatever. Anyway, beside the point, you shouldn't be in her Facebook. She can say what the hell she wants about you behind your back. Who cares? It was not for your eyes, mate. Wasn't. And you're not together anymore. So what the hell? Anyway, so something triggers him off. She's really cross about this. She's like, she's had enough now. They're not together anymore. And now he's out. Not even at home. He's not even there. He's meant to be out having a good time with his friends, and he's on her Facebook. She's just done. She's just done. So in retaliation to this, she changes her Facebook status from married to single. They weren't married, but that's what she had as her. They'd been together for quite a long time. That's what she had as her Facebook status. You know, so like you can change your relationship status, can't you? From, you know, I don't know, in a relationship, single. I don't know what other options there are. Married. Are there fun ones? I'm going to look later. Like, on the market. Cheeky ones, you know. I digress, and now I've forgotten what I was saying. Have a little quote for you as well, because he was at the pub, and he was quoted as saying, "If I can't have her, then no..." Oh, excuse me, that's a rude word. I'll read it though. "If I can't have her, then no fucker else will, because I'll kill her first." Honestly, it does make me cross, because it's just, I know every murder, every case, blah, 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 is a waste of life. But for some, I'm not being flippant about it, by the way. That sounded really flippant. I'm not. But what I mean is, it's always a tragedy. But what a piece of shit. There is something about these cases, the whole like, if I can't have her, no one else will, that really, really gets under my skin. It just really angers me, because it is so, like, it is just really, really freaking senseless, isn't it? It's just move the fuck on. But then, I guess, I mean, who else is going to have him? He's got to go through that whole process again of, like, pretending to be nice. So maybe it's that. I don't know. But if I can't have her, no one else can. Ultimately, Brian was incensed. He was furiously angry because Hayley had now just really publicly retaliated, and it humiliated him, it embarrassed him. Like, you know, he wanted this control over Hayley. He was the man, he was, you know, the big gun, whatever. And then she's just shot him down, like publicly humiliated him. So it was a big deal to Brian. He was really, really angry. Also, I've just thought, perhaps the reason why he didn't agree to just move out straight away and go and live at his mum's was because he didn't think that their separation would last very long, maybe. He thought he could get back in there with Hayley and manipulate her and make her feel really worthless, and then they would stay together. Maybe he thought that. So this very public separation, like, we're done, in, you know, all their friends would have seen it. Yeah, it really pissed him off. For 2 weeks, Brian would really fester on this and was a very angry person until the 12th of March 2009, and this is when tragedy would strike. Part of their setup, because they'd been in this situation for like a month or whatever, was that they took it in turns to sleep in bed or on the sofa. So he didn't just sleep on the sofa. Sorry, I didn't mention it earlier. But they took it in turns. So one night she would sleep on the sofa and he would have the bed. And, you know, they'd do that. They'd switch, which is very nice of her to do, because I think she just wanted him out. Anyway, mid-March, so bloody freezing, and she was sleeping on the sofa. So she bundled herself right up, and she had like 2 layers of clothes on, I think, and 2 sleeping bags. That is quite the cocoon. That's all I could think. That's quite a cocoon. And like, there's no tossing and turning in that, is there? So she's on the sofa that night and Brian is out at the pub. Now, this was probably music to her ears because she knew that she would just be asleep when he came home. She wouldn't have to talk to him, whatever. He'd just walk past and go to get ready for bed and go to bed. That is not what happened. The next bit of the story really gets me in the feels because it involves children. No children were hurt physically. In the early hours of that morning, not far away, Hayley's mum woke up to the sound of screaming in her garden. When she looked out of the window, it was her 4 grandchildren. So Hayley's mum, she got up, she went out into the garden, and she said that she knew from the screams of these children that something was really wrong. And one of the children said that mummy was bleeding, and another one of the children said that mummy was dead. All of them returned to Hayley's house. Hayley's mum walks in to find Hayley in a pool of her own blood, and she tries to do CPR. An ambulance is called, paramedics arrive. It all just sounds hectic and crazy. Hayley's mum is desperately trying to save her with CPR. The paramedics arrive and they cannot get a tube into Hayley's throat. They just can't do it. They can't do it. And they actually pronounce Hayley dead at the scene in front of her mum and her 4 children. Brian was nowhere to be seen. He was off skis. Not for long. He did hand himself in at a local police station. And I read somewhere that it was Brian that called the ambulance. He called 999. What happened? Brian returned home after drinking heavily. He was really, really drunk. Hayley was asleep on the sofa and she was in all of her layers. Angry Brian, he came back, he went to the kitchen, he got a knife and he stabbed Hayley in her stomach. Now, because of the layers, all of these layers that Hayley had on, the blade didn't kill Hayley, and it got stuck in her ribs. So because of all of the layers, it didn't have the desired effect, for want of a better phrase. As you can imagine, there would have been a commotion and there would have been noise, screaming, lots of things going on at this point. And because the knife hadn't killed Hayley, Brian then strangled Hayley to death with his hands. And he crushed Hayley's windpipe. So the autopsy showed that he'd actually crushed her windpipe, and that is why the paramedics that came to the scene, they were unable to get the tube into her throat. All 4 of Hayley's children, gin will help, they all woke up, and it's not clear how much they heard or saw, but enough, I imagine. All 4 of her kids, I'm going to have to say it quick because it really gets me sad, but I think it's crucial to Hayley's story. All 4 of her children came downstairs. I can't help but think of it as my kids. It's horrible. What a piece of shit. All 4 of her kids came downstairs and they tried to save their mum's life. And one of the eldest children, when they realised that they couldn't, they put a blanket over their mum. Just sat here for a minute trying to articulate, not how I feel about it, I don't think, but I wanted some words about those kids, but I can't do it justice. They got put through something really, really, really horrific, and also they did something really, really brave as well. It was probably instinctual as well, but they did try to save their mum, and then they ran and they got help. Bless them so much. The trial took place in 2010. He pleaded not guilty, and he said that he was having a mental episode at the time. Blind rage, he said. He said that the changing of her Facebook status from in a relationship or married to single played on his mind. It drove him insane. It made him so angry and so mad, and he never could stop thinking about it. And he came home that night and he got a knife out of the kitchen drawer to trim his nails. What a heathen. Get a pair of nail scissors. Mate, you didn't get a knife out to trim your nails. Who does that? What are the other things I'm thinking of that do nails? That's not nail scissors. What are they called? Are they called clippers? Nail clippers. Anyway, that was his stupid defence, that he had blind rage. He'd gone to the kitchen, got the knife out to trim his nails, and then just went blank, and he must have tried to stab her and then strangle her in a blind rage. He was found guilty, thank you, and sentenced, and I thought this was really low, sentenced to 14 years minimum. So he's eligible for parole in 2023. Like, that's next year. Whoa, that's horrible. Hopefully he doesn't get out. I'll keep an eye on that one next year. From prison, he sends letters quite often to Hayley's mum, basically begging them to let him be a part of his children's lives, because Hayley's got that choice, hasn't she now, prick? And every single time, Hayley's mum just rips the letters up. She doesn't even read them now. She's like, no, good. I got all spicy with that one then. It just really, I think it's when you feel emotional. Some cases get you, don't they? That one got me. Anywho, that is all I have for you today on this case. Sorry if it was a little heavy, but sometimes they're going to be. Don't think I have anything else to note. I feel like my head is maybe too small for the hairband, because I feel like it's just moved further and further back on my head. And yeah, but what are you going to do? But I felt jazzy. I felt like I needed some leopard print in my life. What else have I got on? Oh, my purple. I love this. Love it. A couple of people were like, where's it from? New Look. New Look. Funny story about New Look, just before I go, because it will just like set me straight before I leave, because I got a bit emotional. My dad once, in the town that he was in, he was going for an appointment at Specsavers. Specsavers is here on the high street, New Look is here, opposite each other on the high street. So in he wanders into the shop, goes to the counter, which is in this particular shop, right near the back. And he says, hello, I'm here for my appointment. It's at 3 o'clock. And they're like, what? I'm here for my appointment, 3 o'clock. Eye test. So this lady comes from behind the counter and she holds him by the arm and she walks him out of the shop and points across the road to frickin' Specsavers, which he thought he had gone into. Right? He'd walked into New Look, because it said New Look, I think. He'd walked into there, walked past rail upon rail of clothing to get to the counter to say he was there for an eye appointment. I mean, what? Oh my God, what? So the lady thought he was blind. So she walked him to the door and she said, would you like me to walk you across? You've come into the wrong shop. You've come into New Look and we're a closed shop. Would you like me to walk you across to Specsavers, sir? And he was like, oh, it's okay, thanks, I got it. Oh my gosh, so embarrassing, but funny. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I do hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and a mug or a jug or a vase or a bowl of gin. Right, I feel like I need to go in and watch comedy. Paul's making a curry actually, so that would be lovely. Go in and have a nice curry and watch some comedy. Balance it out. Oh my God, did you hear that? That was my wrist clicking like an old deer. I love you. It's so good to be back. My wrist did it again. Jeez. Maybe I need a hot bath and an early night and a cup of Horlicks. Oh, I don't like Horlicks, it's gross. Mug of gin. Right, I love you and I shall see you next week. Bye.